Welcome to the Practical NLP podcast number 40 with me, Andy Smith. In the last couple of episodes, we started to learn about the Milton model, a method for using language in an artfully vague way to influence and empower the listener. So far, we've covered the distortion, deletion, and generalization patterns that are similar to the meta model that we covered earlier. Now let's get into the rest of the Milton model. So there's more to the Milton model than just the meta model stood on its head. Bandler and Grinder also modeled other language patterns from the great hypnotherapist Milton Erickson, as well as particular ways of speaking that enabled him to communicate with his client's unconscious mind at a deep level, at the same time as the surface of his conversation was occupying their conscious mind. If you think that will be a useful thing to be able to do, then keep listening. This next set of patterns we can broadly describe as pacing, and you'll remember from your study of rapport that pacing is going along with or matching a person's current experience to help them feel comfortable and relax into a rhythm with you, and that can be a preliminary to then leading them somewhere that you want them to go. First pattern, pacing current experience. This is simply describing the person's experience in a way which is undeniable, which they have to agree with. The effect of this is relaxing. The part of a person's mind which scans their environment for trouble, or in a business setting for things to mismatch and disagree with, is lulled to some extent by a sequence of 3 or 4 of these. So you're listening to this audio, and you've come quite a way already. And we're now deep into the Milton model, and you're already aware of how you could use certain patterns in practice. So that's a series of statements that must be true for the listener, followed by a mild suggestion. You're listening to this audio. Of course they are. If they're not, they wouldn't hear you say that anyway. You've come quite a way already. Why, yes, I have, Andy. We're now deep into the Milton model. Yes, we are. With the next statement, you're already aware of how you could use certain patterns in practice. I'm actually departing from truisms and throwing in a bit of a suggestion. It's theoretically possible that someone could have been listening to all of this and not thought of any ways to use the patterns in practice, but I'm willing to take that chance to nudge them in that direction. In any case, I know that you're smarter than that, because in most cases the effect will have been to draw your conscious attention to various ideas about using the Milton model patterns that have been percolating away at the back of your mind since you listened to previous podcasts. Here's another example that you could use in a meeting when you want to focus people's minds. We're sitting here in this meeting and we're aware of how time's getting on and we all want to reach a decision that works for everyone. We're definitely sitting here. And yes, we're in a meeting. The next statement is a sort of self-fulfilling truism. They may not have been aware of how time is getting on, but they become aware of it as soon as you mention that they're aware of it. And the last bit, we all want to reach a decision that works for everyone, is another sly suggestion. They may not all have been wanting to reach a decision that works for everyone, but tagging the suggestion onto the end of all that pacing will help to lead them in that direction. Notice how in the first example we link the statements with and. In the NLP jargon, this is called a simple conjunction. All that means is it joins the statements together and makes the whole thing flow more smoothly. If you didn't use the and, the listener could just take them as a series of unrelated statements. The effect of the and is to link them. It puts each statement next to the others in the listener's internal representation. Disagreeing with one of the statements would feel like rejecting all of the others as well. So since they agree with most of the statements, the listener's mind is more likely to let a mild suggestion pass without flagging up resistance. The next pattern, utilization, is just using whatever happens, or whatever the other person says, even if it's an objection in a sales situation, to link to your suggestions and strengthen the points that you're making. The way Erickson used to use it was to use whatever happened to deepen his client's trance, even things that you would normally find distracting. So if there were people talking in the corridor outside his office, he could say to the client, "Any noises you might hear outside can just remind you how quiet it is inside." And I used that a lot when I was working as a hypnotherapist, or just when talking groups of people through a relaxation technique. It was great because you could get people to relax even though the environment wasn't completely silent. Or the client might say, "I don't think I'm in a trance yet." And he would turn that into evidence that they were by saying, "That's right, you don't think you're in a trance, because you're evaluating trance with your conscious mind. And it's your unconscious mind which knows how to go into trance now." Thanks to Tad James at NLPcoaching.com for that example, by the way. We could spend a long time just unpacking all the different patterns in that statement, but this isn't a hypnosis course. For now, let's just notice how he takes whatever they say and instead of disagreeing, runs with it, in the direction he wanted to go anyway. When he says, "You don't think you're in a trance," on one level, he's pacing their statement, he's using the exact same words, and with a subtle emphasis on think, he's also introducing a slightly different meaning. Think in the sense of, that's what you think is happening, but actually you haven't noticed yet that there's something else going on. You could use exactly the same format to divert or overcome objections in a business context. If you're aiming to get your company to bring in a new system, and the objection is raised that we're not ready for it, you could say, "I agree, we're not ready," implying that the competition are. For excellent examples of utilization, look at how a good stand-up comedian deals with hecklers. The heckler thinks he's challenging the comedian. What he's actually doing is providing the comedian with an opportunity to generate more laughs. Next pattern, truisms. Truisms are generalizations which are undeniable, statements so obvious or self-evident as to hardly be worth mentioning. Except, of course, that we use truisms all the time in regular conversation to set up the background for what we're going to say next, so it doesn't seem strange to your listener when you use them. Examples would be, "Sooner or later you have to take a break," or "Most people work more effectively when they have ways of recharging their energy," or "A lot of the best creative ideas arrive out of nowhere." There's not much to argue with in these statements, but they can pre-frame a suggestion or request that the listener might reject if you hit them with it without any pre-framing. So would it be okay to experiment with taking a short break every 90 minutes and monitor the results you get? Let's move into indirect suggestions. Ambiguity is when a sentence has more than one meaning. When this happens, the conscious mind looks at the context to work out which meaning is correct, but the other meaning will still be registered by the unconscious mind. This isn't something I would overuse, and you certainly wouldn't want to be caught using it, but it's worth knowing about, not least so you don't unwittingly come out with random ambiguities that might create the wrong internal representations. There are 4 kinds of ambiguity in the Milton model. The first is phonological ambiguity, where one word sounds like another. This is used a lot in humour, from, at the low end of the scale, puns, right up to the sublime heights of Ronnie Barker's 4 Candles sketch. He asks for 4 candles, but it turns out he actually wants handles for forks. The classic use of phonological ambiguity in sales is when someone says something like, "You'll have heard all you need to by now." I believe people are getting increasingly wise to this one, but you might get away with it if you deliver it subtly enough. In fact, if you were really sneaky, you could win a buyer's trust by quoting that to the customer as an example of the weaselly tricks that some salespeople will try, while "you need to," that's also in the sentence, sneaks past unnoticed. Phonological ambiguity is also sometimes used in advertising slogans. Phonological ambiguity is also sometimes used in advertising slogans. Coke refreshes you like no other can. Apparently this is an old Coca-Cola slogan. Do they mean can as in is able to, or can as in a soft drink container? Both. In syntactic ambiguity, the same sequence of words can be interpreted in different ways. There are at least 3 kinds of these. The first kind happens when you add ing to a verb and put it in front of a noun. I don't like micromanaging managers. Could mean 2 quite different things. depending on whether it's the speaker or the managers who are doing the micromanaging. Another example. They are supplying businesses. My own company is called Coaching Leaders. Do we coach leaders, or are we leaders in coaching? Yes. Another kind happens with the type of nominalization that works as either a verb or a noun. The respect of her manager. Who's doing the respecting? Her or the manager? The look of his eyes. The journey of a lifetime. One more kind of syntactic ambiguity is the kind that happens sometimes in newspaper headlines, and I include it just as something to be aware of, so you don't say or write something that gets a laugh by mistake when you're titling a report or the subject line of an email or even a text. Headlines are especially prone to being misinterpreted because shorter words are left out to save space. I'm going to read these out to try and reproduce how the words would appear on the page without any kind of tonal cues as to what they actually mean. So, a Second World War headline read, 8th Army push bottles up German rear. And another, quoted by the Columbia Journalism Review, read, Squad helps dog bite victim. Scope ambiguity is where you can't be sure how much of a sentence a particular word or phrase applies to, so it sets up additional meanings in the listener's mind. So if you say, speaking to you as a serious professional, does that serious professional apply to your listener or to you as the speaker? Both. So it would tend to boost your credibility to the listener and make them feel you are like them, so as to build rapport. This kind of scope ambiguity has been around forever, but I first saw the structure unpacked by NLP copywriting expert Lou Larson. Speaking, or writing, or in some way reaching out, to you as a compliment or quality that they value, plus profession or the kind of person they see themselves as. More examples. Speaking to you as a concerned parent. Writing to you as a credible consultant. And you can play with the word order. Appealing to you as a sales expert. Here's another structure. The dedicated staff and leadership. Who's dedicated? Just the staff, or does that cover the leadership as well? Punctuation ambiguity is where it's not clear where one sentence ends and the next begins. Erickson could get away with a lot more of these when his clients were in trance, like, I want you to notice your hand me the glass. You might think this would be tricky to use in a business context. My good friend Jonathan Altfeld, check out his work at altfeld.com, altfeld.com, came up with a particularly cheeky one along the lines of, only you can decide where to award the business. To me, there's only one way to go. If you naturally pause a lot when you're speaking, it's fairly easy to do. Jonathan can do it a lot faster than that and a lot more conversationally than that, which would take a lot of practice to come out naturally. And he's the guy to go to if you want to learn patterns like that well. If you like the sound of ambiguities, practice using them in safe situations. Underdo it rather than overdo it, and see what you can get away with. And keep a notebook to capture your favorite examples of phonological, syntactic, scope, and punctuation ambiguities. What you can use will vary depending on your accent. I've heard American hypnotic inductions using interstate, i.e. the road between states, and inner state. Next time we'll investigate one of the most powerful Milton model patterns, embedded suggestions. The best way to make sure you get all this material is to download the free Practical NLP app for iTunes or Android. See you next time.